in Foundation of Buddhist Practice, the Dalai Lama explains that we can divide Buddhists into two. Well, there's two categories of Buddhists. Buddhists by view and Buddhists by conduct. Buddhists by view are those that accept the Four Seals. And Buddhists by conduct are those who accept the Three Jewels as their ultimate source of refuge. And I'll say that all of us here in this room are, without a doubt, Buddhists by conduct, having taken the Three Jewels as our ultimate source of refuge. In the teachings on the Lamrim, the graduated stage of the path to awakening, teaches what we need to know about why we want to take refuge and the qualities of taking refuge. And then we have these teachings on debate and on reasoning and logic. And these provide us with the substance to understand what is wrong views and what is right views, correct views, in terms of being able to understand the Four Seals, that all conditioned phenomena are transient or impermanent, all polluted phenomena are dukkha, all phenomena are empty and selfless, and that nirvana is true peace. And His Holiness says that these are the four most important things to understand on the path to awakening. And so these debate teachings help us understand these. And how? And we can go back to the three purposes of debate. To refute mistaken views, to establish our own view or our own system, and then to dispel objections to that system that we're establishing. And by going through this process, we can get so clear about what we believe and why. And then we'll be able to share that with others, providing them with the key to their own freedom. And so right now we might not be at the level of, through debate, establishing the logic and reasoning of emptiness and selflessness to its fullest, but we have the opportunity to lay the foundation by learning the skills to learn how to think properly, to analyze and see where our thinking goes wrong and ends up in trouble. So may we approach this sharing tonight with a vast aspiration that we can increase and stabilize our analytic tools to understand how things exist, how to think properly, so that we can get real clear on how things exist, what we believe, increasing our skills to then be able to help others do the same. And through that, progress on the path to awakening. So Venerable Children is still away in London, teaching there. So we'll have another review tonight. First, I wanted to share something that I came across a few days ago that really struck me, that I thought kind of put into perspective for me the debate teachings. And so this is from Jeffrey's meditation on emptiness. And it says, the Buddhist tenet systems are differentiated from non-Buddhists in that their teacher, the Buddha, has extinguished all faults, attained all auspicious attributes, and taught from his own insight the profound doctrine of dependent arising. Their teaching harms neither themselves nor others, and their view is the assertion of the non-existence of a permanent, single, independent self. Non-Buddhist teachers' teachings and views are just the opposite. Their teachers have not extinguished all faults. Their teachings harm some sentient beings, and their view is of a permanent, single, independent self. Now, this is not to say that their teachers do not have some auspicious attributes, or that all of their teachings harm, or that all of their views are wrong. Rather, their teachers do not have the perfection of a Buddha. Within their teaching, there is at least one that harms a sentient being, and they have a wrong view on the status of the self. Even the Jains, who cultivate not harming others, harm themselves in the extreme asceticism, and thereby also harm the organisms that live in their body. Also, even the nihilists claim that their self is permanent or unchanging during its existence, however short. So the idea that there is no teaching of the Buddha that harms a single sentient being, I just found amazing and beautiful. And then to see how, through learning the tools of debate, it teaches us how to discern right teachings from wrong teachings, and within ourselves, right view from wrong view, so that we can develop within ourselves the realizations that will harm no sentient being, and that we have the potential to become a Buddha. So that urges me, inspires me to kind of keep going and learning these methods that help us think clearly, help us to understand what we want to understand. So tonight, I got feedback that what Venerable Dhamma did last week was very helpful. So we'll go through some of the same things in terms of looking at definitions, divisions, and illustrations. And from a perspective of bringing things together, because I find we have so many teachings here that, and on so many different topics, that it can be difficult to kind of bring it all together sometimes. And I've found that trying to apply some of the debate tools to the other teachings that we have to be fun and helpful. So I've tried to do that a bit on the exercises we'll do tonight. So we might seem to be jumping a little bit in terms of topics, but it's stuff that we've all covered this year. And then we'll play around with some syllogisms, or the parts of syllogisms, because that leads us to really understand the 4 responses that we can give to a consequence. So we're going to exercise on that. And then we'll have a look at consequences and points of clarification, because I wasn't so clear on that, and I thought that might be helpful to go over. Okay, so if we look at, you've all got a document on your table, and for those online, there's a link that's being shared, and I can send this around later. So we're going to go through the ideas of definitions, divisions, and illustrations, where the exercises that Venerable Dhamma went with you last week. And so I took the example from Pramana. So the table at the top gives the definition of a reliable cognizer, a new incontrovertible knower. And then we have divisions. And then we'll see that we can divide reliable cognizers in 2 ways. There's the actual division, and then there's the terminological division. And does anyone remember what a terminological division is? We covered this quite a while ago. So that's a division where it's division by name, but the examples aren't actually the thing. So we have reliable beings, reliable speech, and reliable consciousnesses. And only one of them is actually a reliable cognizer. Which one is the actual reliable cognizer? Reliable consciousness, yeah. But there's a tradition of doing this, and I think in the Tibetan system, just to make a point. So I've done I thought we'd do the course thing as well, going through. So like this side of the room can be challengers and this side of the room can be defenders. And I chose the terminological division because I found the illustrations of that more fun. So we'll do that. So we'll start with the definitions. So this side will be challengers and can start with number 1. Okay. So anyone, as a side note, anyone remember why the Buddha is a reliable being?
That compelled by compassion, he realized the wisdom realizing the ultimate nature, which we label as the teacher, and the became fully awakened, the Sugata, which makes him the liberator, no, not the savior, but the protector that leads all beings to the same state.
Okay. So I think we're familiar with that. And if you turn to page 3, on the next page, I've created 2 cheat sheets. So the first one on page 3 is a cheat sheet for the teachings we had with Geshe Dado. So you'll see there are terms like bodhicitta and equanimity, and then the 6 perfections. We have the definitions, which are not technical definitions, but they're the ones that he gave us in the PowerPoint slides, so they'll work for now. We have the divisions of the perfections. And here we don't have illustrations, but we have the analogies that he gave us. So I thought that we could break into pairs again and go through these 3 exercises of asking for the definitions, the divisions, and then instead of illustrations, we can ask for the analogies and just practice that way. And if we wanted to go further, we could also, when we have given the analogy, say, ask for, well, the meaning of this analogy cannot be posited. Why? Also, the meaning can be posited. I accept. Posit the meaning of this analogy. So we could review that way. Do we want to go through one example as a group first? Yes? Okay. Does someone want to be my buddy and do that with me? Champa, what definition would you like to do?
Let's start with bodhicitta.
Okay, and we'll go through all 3, the definition, division, and the analogies. Okay. So the definition of bodhicitta cannot be posited.
Why?
So far as that the definition of bodhicitta can be posited.
I accept.
Posit the definition of bodhicitta.
The subject for the sake of others wishing to attain complete, perfect awakening.
So far as that the subject for the sake of others wishing to attain complete, perfect awakening is the definition of bodhicitta.
I accept that the definition of bodhicitta is for the sake of others wishing to attain complete, perfect awakening.
That's good. And I think that repeating again and again, that's really what I've used this as a memorization tool, and so that constant repetition just really embeds it in the mind. It's really helpful. Okay. Well, so the divisions of bodhicitta cannot be posited.
Why?
So it follows that the divisions of bodhicitta can be posited.
I accept.
Posit those divisions.
The subject, the 2, wishing bodhicitta and venturing bodhicitta. Wishing, what was the other one? Engaging bodhicitta.
Yeah, hi. Yeah. So it follows that the divisions are the 2, wishing bodhicitta and venturing bodhicitta.
I accept.
So it follows that an analogy of bodhicitta cannot be posited.
Why?
So it follows that the analogy of bodhicitta can be posited.
I accept.
Posit an analogy.
The subject, maybe the 4. Supreme nectar, resting tree, butter essence, butter essence from churned milk.
Yeah. So it follows that the 3, supreme nectar, resting tree, and butter essence from churned milk, are analogies for bodhicitta.
I accept.
So the meaning of supreme nectar cannot be posited.
I accept. Why?
Also, why? So it follows that the meaning of supreme nectar can be posited.
I accept.
Posit the meaning. Then Bunima.
It's is the nectar of immortality. Yeah, it's akin to the nectar of the gods. That's all I remember.
Yeah. So I think I don't know these clearly either, but I think the supreme immortality, because it takes us to the deathless state of beyond samsara. Yeah. Great. So does that give the picture of what we could do with each other? Okay. So if we break into pairs, I think there is even numbers here, which is great. So then we could practice this for a few minutes, and then we'll move on.
From the exercise so much, but that Geshe Dal's quote definitions are, yeah, or maybe not so. I mean, they were clear from the slides, but in terms of actually the precision or even the understanding that we've gotten teachings on, they don't exactly line up.
Yeah, I contemplated whether to put in technical definitions, but I thought the exercise was more to play with what he'd given us. So if we turn over, then on that sheet, then we have another set of definitions, divisions, and actual illustrations based on what we were studying from Foundation of Buddhist Practice on the section called The Basis of the Self. So we could either do one-on-one exercise together, break up again, or just leave this for you to practice with your debate partners on your own. Do you feel comfortable with this exercise going back and forth, or do you want to go through another one? Okay, well, we'll do one together, and then I'll leave you to do this with your debate partners on your own. Who would like to be a buddy with me to do this? Or do you want, how about two people in the audience do it together? And I just wanted to also clarify that it was confusing when I did this, in that the divisions, the terminological was only for the terminological divisions for that one example from Pramanavartika. So when we're saying for anything else, that's not just a terminological division, it's just the divisions cannot be posited. Posit the divisions. So that's not clear there, I'm sorry.
The definition of root afflictions cannot be posited.
Why?
The definition of root afflictions can be posited?
I accept.
Then posit the definition of the root afflictions.
The subject. Distinct mental factors that, when they arise in one's mind, cause the mental continuum to be unpeaceful and unsubdued.
So it follows that the definition of the root afflictions, that the subject, the distinct mental factors that, when they arise in one's mind, cause the mental continuum to be unpeaceful and unsubdued, is the definition of the root afflictions.
I accept.
And it follows that the divisions of the root afflictions cannot be posited.
Why?
It follows that the divisions of the root afflictions can be posited.
I accept.
Posit those divisions.
The subject, the six. Attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance, deluded doubt, and afflictive views.
It follows that the subjects, attachment, anger, arrogance, ignorance, deluded doubt, and afflicted views are the divisions of the root afflictions.
I accept.
It follows that an instance of the root afflictions can't be posited.
Why?
So a definition or an instance of the root affliction can be posited?
Oh, an illustration. So this box here, the bit in bold is a directive.
I see. So it follows that an illustration of a root affliction cannot be posited.
Why?
Follows that an illustration of a root affliction can be posited.
I accept.
Posit one.
An illustration. The subject. A cognizer that projects or exaggerates the unattractive qualities of an object or person is unable to bear it and wishes to harm or be free from it.
So it follows that a cognizer that the subject, a cognizer that projects or exaggerates the unattractive qualities of an object or a person, is unable to bear it and wishes to harm or be free from it, is an illustration of a root affliction.
I agree. I mean, I accept.
It follows that that illustration can't be tied to one of the root afflictions.
Why?
So it follows that that this illustration a cognizer that projects or exaggerates the unattractive qualities of an object or a person is unable to bear it and wishes to harm or be free from it can be tied or linked to one of these root afflictions.
I accept.
Posit it.
Anger. The subject, anger.
Mm-hmm. So it follows that the subject, a cognizer that projects or exaggerates the unattractive qualities of an object or a person, is unable to bear it and wishes to harm or be free from it, is an illustration of the mental factor, the root affliction of anger.
No, it's the definition of anger. I think it's an illustration of a root affliction, but I don't think it's the definition of anger. I'm not sure whether it would be the illustration of anger. That I'm not sure. But working on the example from the book where where the illustration of a pot was a bulbous, then I was working with that.
And then also I wanted to say, so it follows that the divisions of the root afflictions are in order: attachment, anger, ignorance, arrogance, deluded doubt, and afflicted views.
Okay.
Except, okay. I didn't know how to bring it.
Yes. Wrong order. I find this helpful to, memorization tool and have some fun and easy to do over dishes. So, okay. So I'll leave you with that. And then I wanted to move on to the sheet starting on page 5, called Syllogisms. So here, this is really asking us to get really familiar and understand the different parts of a syllogism, and then why we respond in certain ways, or when the defender gives us to a consequence. And so for each of these, there is a subject and a predicate, or a thesis. And then we're asking to supply a reason. And so for the first one, we're wanting to give a correct reason, which means that it's a reason that is a property of the subject and a reason that makes the pervasion work. So using the example that we have here, the subject sound is impermanent because it is a product. So that reason is correct because it's a property of the subject, and it means that the pervasion is also correct because whatever is a product is impermanent. And so this is important because then we know that when that happens, then in a consequence, the defender would go, I accept, because that's correct. And so then the second one is asking us to give a reason where the reason is not established, which means that it's not a property of the subject, but the pervasion still works. And so this just gets us to see how we can be deceived sometimes, because we see that the pervasion works, but then we forget to check up on the property of the subject. So this is helpful in that way. And then the answer that someone would give in debate would see the reason is not established when they see the answer. So for this one, it could be an apple. The subject sound is impermanent because it is an apple. So the pervasion works. Whatever is an apple is impermanent. But an apple is not a property of the subject sound. And then the third one asks us to give a reason that is established, but the pervasion doesn't work. And so here, this is helpful for us to get used to because, again, as a defender, if someone gives a consequence, we'll say no pervasion. we check the property of the subject, it works, but the pervasion doesn't work. So here we could say an existent. So the subject sound is impermanent because it is an existent. So sound is an existent, that's right. But whatever is an existent is not necessarily impermanent, because permanent things are also existent. And so here, it's helpful to think that usually in a correct syllogism, the predicate is a bigger category than the reason. So when you come to this one, think, how can I get a bigger category than the predicate? And then in the fourth one, we're looking at where the reason and the pervasion both don't work. And so here we could say a non-existent. Sound is impermanent because it is non-existent. Both the pervasion and the predicate doesn't work. So I just found this helpful to play with all the different components that we're working with. And doing these examples is not so easy to kind of try and make it all work, but it really gets the mind flexible, thinking out what the different parts are, and then how it corresponds to the different answers that we're giving in the flow of things, be able to see really clearly, oh, this matches up to this, that's where the problem is, and then to know what answer we would give. So would someone want, so for this one, if you want to call out the answers, so the subject, a person, is not form because, so a person is an abstract composite, so the reason is the property of the subject, and whatever is an abstract composite is not form, so there is pervasion. So give me a reason where it's, the reason is not established, the reason is not a property of the subject, but the pervasion works. Oh, that's not going to work either because sounds a form in this system. So what is something that's not form? A category that's not form. Yeah. So the reason doesn't work because a person is not a consciousness. But the pervasion works because whatever is a consciousness is necessarily not form. And so now we do the opposite, where we want the reason to be correct. We want the reason to be property of the subject, a person. We don't want the pervasion to work. So what would that be? And remember on this one, we're thinking of, for this to work, this category has to be bigger than the predicate. Yeah. So person isn't existent, but whatever isn't existent is not necessarily form, because there are many other things in terms of consciousness, abstract composite, permanent things. And then so give a reason where the reason and the pervasion both don't work. Yeah. Yeah, non-existence here work quite well. A person is not a sky flower, and whatever a sky flower is not form because it's non-existent. So I thought to break up in pairs just for a few minutes and work through some of the rest in pairs, because there is a few more examples. Yeah, and see how I go. And there are answers on the back. Potential answers, probably with a few mistakes. But we won't go through all of them, but just to have another few more minutes of play. Yeah. So an early stop, because I realized a mistake. So on the back, if you flip to the back, you'll see number C. It says the subject impermanent phenomena are existence because, not ultimate truths. And because in the process of me doing this, I did my own set of answers to make sure it was correct, and then I didn't change this one because I realized you can't do it with two synonyms because the pervasion. So I saw everyone struggling with that, so I'm like, okay, time to stop. And yes, so then
Included that this won't work.
yes, exactly. So
Could you also put the subject and permanent phenomena are existence because they can be observed by a valid cognizer?
yes, yeah, yeah. So here on number 2, which I saw people struggling with because it doesn't work, would be that phenomena that is a non-thing. You'd posit a permanent thing because that's the divisions to make that work. So I apologize. Okay. How about we leave that for now? Okay. To be continued on your own. But I found it a fun exercise to do. So there shouldn't... So connected to that then, having gone through seeing the different parts that can be correct or not correct, I have 4 syllogisms here. And they are examples of one of the 4 answers that you could give. You could say to each of them, I accept, reason not established, no pervasion, or the pervasion is opposite. So, for the first one, it follows that the subject, internal form, is existent because of being selfless. So what would be the defender's correct response to that? No pervasion? Okay. Why?
Because whatever is selfless is not necessarily unexistent.
Because?
For example, the horns of a rabbit
Are selfless.
are selfless.
Non-existence
Are
are
they
also
non-existent?
selfless. Yeah. So that's correct. It's because this category is bigger. The reason is a bigger category here than the predicate. So there's no pervasion there. Even though the property of the subject is correct in terms of internal form is selfless. Good. And so in the second syllogism, it follows that the subject phenomena that are non-things are permanent because of being manifest phenomena. Reason unestablished? Why? Because of being a manifest phenomena. So this follows that the subject phenomena that are non-things are permanent because of being manifest phenomena.
So that's.
You said reason not
I said
established.
reason not established.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Phenomena that are non-things are not manifest phenomena.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Phenomena that are non-things are permanent phenomena. They're whatever the opposite of manifest phenomena is. It just flew out of my mind. They're conceptual.
Hidden phenomena.
Hidden phenomena.
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. So phenomena that are non-things are permanent phenomena, whereas manifest phenomena, all manifest phenomena are impermanent phenomena. So the reason is not established. Mm-hmm. Good. And here, what about the pervasion? Does the pervasion, if sometimes the pervasion can work even if the reason is not established, here, does the pervasion work? Are all manifest phenomena necessarily permanent? No. Okay, so here both the reason and the pervasion do not work. Okay. And 3, it follows that the subject and I sense power is form because of being that which is atomically established. The I sense power is form because of being that which is atomically established. So we'll break this down. That which is atomically established, that is a definition of matter. So we could say the subject, I sense power, is form because of being matter. Yeah, they're synonyms. So I accept. Why? Yeah, so the I sense power is matter. And the clear internal form. And whatever is matter is necessarily form, because in this system, form and matter are synonyms. Good. And then the last one. It follows that the subject, wrong consciousness, is a reliable cognizer because of being mistaken with regard to its object of engagement. Pervasion is opposite. Why? Yeah. So whatever is mistaken with regard to its object of engagement, is necessarily not a reliable cognizer. Good. And what is this part, being mistaken with regard to its object of engagement? Definition of wrong consciousness. So the reason is established, but the pervasion is not. So this kind of shows how learning this matrix and being able to pull out the different parts of what we're doing helps us to see clearly and hopefully more quickly what is correct or wrong with the different consequences or syllogisms that we're given, and then know how to respond and kind of keep the debate going. And yeah. So I think I didn't mean to ask this in this part, but with the questions that we just did, we had the 4 responses where it was I accept, reason not established, no pervasion, and the pervasion is opposite. So can anyone tell me why, for those consequences given, it follows that this is this, why we wouldn't answer why to those? Why is why not an answer to those consequences being given?
Well, you wouldn't know what was being said no to, because you could say no, as in why, to a 2-part, but not a 3-part.
Exactly. So yeah, for when we're given a 2-part consequence where it's just the subject and the predicate, so it follows the subject, internal form isn't existent, then we could say why or I accept. But when we have a 3-part consequence where we have the subject, the predicate, and the reason, then we go to those 4 answers. And I thought to point this out because on page 361, where we were in the chapter that we're on at the moment, in Procedures in Debate, where it's on learning to spell out the topic for those who don't have the physical book, the learning to spell out your answers. He goes through 5 responses, and he doesn't specify how we suddenly got from 4 responses to give to 5. And it's because he's lumped together the why to the 2-part consequence with the other 4 answers to the 3-part consequence. And he kind of lets you know that when you're reading the little note well things, but it's not clearly labeled. And I was confused, so I just thought to bring attention to that. And yeah, it's helpful to get real clear in our minds that when we're given just a subject and a predicate, it's why or I accept, that's it. But when we're given the reason, then we start to get the more elaborate answers of reason not established, no pervasion, I accept, or the pervasion is opposite. So if we go back to page 1, flip it over, you'll come to page 2. And it says consequences and points of clarification. And so this looks a bit scary, but this is actually an attempt to break things down. So hopefully it will work. And this is to illustrate the dance that we do when the defender says the reason is not established. And I found it helpful here to pair up the consequence with the point of clarification, because they're the same thing. And I didn't really get that at first. I thought that when we're doing consequences, we have points of clarification, but a consequence actually is the challenger giving the defender a point of clarification. Here's a consequence, and we need to clear up this qualm that I have. And so when the defender says the reason is not established in this flow, then we have this thing here where we then have a new or a second point of clarification, a second consequence, where there is that little diagram on this section where, which I've drawn on the board here, where we have the old predicate dropping out, the old reason becomes a new predicate, and then we have this second point of clarification. And I think when we were doing some of the examples with Venerable, we were having some trouble getting to this or making, like, just it's because it's so incremental that the steps that we need to take. So I thought to run through this a little bit. So I've got two examples here on the page, and maybe someone will be willing to read through this with me. We'll do the first one, which is whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual. I mean, the one on the page. Example A, whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual. And so this is really, it's just to demonstrate the point. Okay.
Whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual.
Right, that's the title. So I'll start with D.
I accept that whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual.
So it follows that whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual.
I accept.
It follows that the subject in I consciousness is conceptual.
Why is an I consciousness conceptual?
Because of being consciousness, you asserted the pervasion that whatever is consciousness is necessarily conceptual.
The reason that an I consciousness is not established.
It follows that the subject in I consciousness is consciousness because of being that which is clear and knowing. And so this is a very simple example. I mean, it's not very realistic in terms of people actually debating this. But this is the same one with color in terms of all colors are red, well then white's red, well no, yeah. And so I want to point out here in that when the challenger gets to the point after just feeding back to the defender what they've said, they give a consequence, which is the first point of clarification. So it follows that the subject in I consciousness is conceptual. And in the book, Dan gave a nice paraphrasing in plain language, kind of what this is actually saying. He says, we do this in conversation all the time. And basically like saying, no, then it means a sense consciousness would be conceptual, and we know that they're not. All sense consciousnesses are non-conceptual. So it's giving an example that counters the pervasion that the defender has given. And then what happens next is that the defender says, why? And he's basically not getting the link that we're making. He's not getting why sense consciousnesses, why there is a problem with a sense consciousness being conceptual. And then so then the challenger gives a reason, because of being consciousness. You asserted the pervasion. So it spells it out. And so here between these two steps, the challenger gives a full syllogism. It follows that the subject in I consciousness is conceptual because of being consciousness. And so this, again, highlights that the challenger isn't necessarily giving a syllogism that's correct. They're just following out the implications of what the defender has said. So to not get confused by that is, it's just following through the implications. So then what happens next is that the defender takes issue with the reason that has been given. So that's why the defender says the reason is not established. So then the next thing that the challenger does is then gives another consequence, which is the new point of clarification. And this is where the old predicate drops out, and the previous reason becomes the new predicate. So the previous reason was because of being consciousness. So now we have the predicate here is consciousness, and then a new reason because of being that which is clear and knowing. And essentially, again, in plain language, it's just saying, well, you see, an I consciousness is consciousness because it fits the definition of consciousness, which is that which is clear and knowing. And so pictures can help. So that's drawn out here like in the book. I think it's helpful that we see that we've got the same subject here. The subject doesn't change. The predicates and the reasons change, but the thing that we're talking about is still the same. It's just different. How we're investigating it has changed. And in terms of different points of clarification, you can also see that we've got new theses that we're working with, two different theses that we're working with. in terms of a thesis being the subject and the predicate. So again, that fits in with like, a new point of clarification, a new thesis that we're trying to investigate or to get the defender to come to agreement on. And it's kind of like, the defender takes issue, so then we have a problem here, and we have to clean up this mess before we go back to the bigger topic. So it's that. So then once we would clear up this one in the debate, then we would go back to the old one. And that's that jumping back and forth that we've seen. But that can be confusing because of how it's been going. Yeah, it's these little tangents, but they can actually go on and on and on if the person doesn't get it, isn't clear, keeps raising things. But then the idea is to keep hopping back to get to the main one. Do two people want to do example B? To go through whatever is a mental factor is necessarily virtuous? Sure. Venerable Chinny and Venerable Semke. Thank you.
Whatever is a mental factor is necessarily virtuous.
I accept that whatever is a mental factor is necessarily virtuous.
It follows that whatever is a mental factor is necessarily virtuous.
I accept.
It follows that the subject anger is virtuous.
Why is anger virtuous?
Because of being a mental factor, you asserted the pervasion.
The reason that anger is a mental factor is not established.
It follows that the subject anger is a mental factor because of being a cognizer apprehending a particular quality of an object and arising in attendance upon a primary mind with which it has certain similarities.
Yes.
You have to say, I accept.
I accept.
Or it doesn't say accept, and then it continues. Right. And that definition is from Venerable's Lorig Notes. Yeah. I found there's one quote from the book that kind of I found helpful around consequences, where Dan says, the use of consequences to defeat wrong ideas fits perfectly with the goal of clarifying consciousness to allow liberation to unfold. So, this is the small incremental back and forth process where we are clarifying our consciousness. And by doing that, we're working our way to liberation. So that's all I have for tonight. Thank you for your participation, and I apologize for the mistakes. I knew there would be some.